Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn. I feel like I'm recording from a bunker, so this is perfect for our World War II unit. I'm recording from Franklin, and this is our screencast on World War II at home. I'd like to open up with a quote from Winston Churchill. "Once the fire is lit under it, there is no limit to the power it can generate." So Churchill is describing the United States like a gigantic boiler. And after this presentation, I'd like you guys to, think about what evidence can you use to defend this famous quote. Alright, so after you guys put down this quote, let's move on to our first slide. I'm going to move things around so that you guys can see, hopefully, from my laptop. But I want you to know that this makes a huge difference for us at home. And so you guys should put down that even before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had rapidly increased our war production. And it was really after the German Blitzkrieg, after France had fallen to Germany, May of 1940, FDR asked for a $4 billion increase to build a two-ocean navy. And so this shows you what the Lightning War did to France on the left. They just really blew through the country until they surrendered. But really was after this Blitzkrieg, more Americans began to support an increase in our military. So the defense budget certainly responded. FDR then went to Congress, and Congress increased it to more than $17 million. What's interesting is that business, got involved. The military began signing contracts with American companies to build new aircrafts and ships. So pictured there on the right are the Nazis marching through the streets of France. And so before we move on, just a little side note is that this is a war on two fronts. And after FDR had learned about the Pearl Harbor attack, and he also knew about Germany, he said to his wife, "I never wanted to have to fight this war on two fronts. We haven't got the Navy to fight in both the Atlantic and the Pacific." So this certainly shows his concern and also shows how our country responded, and so I'm going to show you guys how our economy completely was transformed by World War II. And so remember, I want you guys to look for evidence, for Churchill's quote. And so the National Defense Advisory Committee is formed, and pictured there on the right is our Secretary of War, Henry Stimson. And his important quote is, if you're going to go to war, if you're going to try, in a capitalist country, you've got to let business make money out of the process. And so this is really also coming from FDR. He really believed that government and business had to work together to be successful in war. So he and his advisors really tried to give industry an incentive to move quickly, and also how to mobilize the economy for war, right? So how to keep organized and to get our factories up and going. And so before World War II, usually the government would ask companies to bid for contracts. But that system was too slow. There was the Blitzkrieg, France had fallen, so instead the government signed cost-plus contracts. And what that meant is they agreed to pay a company whatever it cost to make a product, plus it guaranteed a % of the costs as profit. So I'm going to try and move my screen, but that is, profit is cut off right down there, guys. So here's a picture of cost-plus in action, and also take a look at this great political cartoon with the farmers and the tanks saluting each other, chasing after Hitler. And I think that definitely looks like Hirohito. And the guy on the far right, that could be Mussolini. But so let's look at cost plus in action. This picture was taken in San Francisco. A great quote is, "Built by the mile and chopped off by the yard." So here is our shipbuilding. They're called the Liberty ships, and so at a rate of 1 per day, there they are lined up in the harbor. We transform our industry and produce more than 2,700 ships in 5 years to move men and materials to the front lines. And here's a great caption: "Tanks replace cars," but you guys definitely need to know that the automobile industry was really suited for mass production of military equipment. And so a quote from our Chief of Staff, Marshall, he said, "The greatest advantage, one that we had, was the Jeep and the 2.5-ton truck. They moved and supplied the U.S. troops in battle, while the German army depended heavily on animal transport. So there's a picture of our Jeeps. And you guys should know that Henry Ford's assembly line now became called the Liberator. And this picture here is taken at the Willow Run Airport near Detroit. And by the end of the war, it had built more than 8,600 planes. And so really, by the fall of 1941, right, even before Pearl Harbor, our industry is exploding overnight. You guys should note one final thing, that some 200,000 companies had converted to war production. You know, loans were given out even, and this nation really just pulled together. Another way that this was possible was the War Production Board. And so this was done after Pearl Harbor, you guys should note. He tried to improve, you know, our economic and business and war cooperation. So he gave them authority to set priorities, right, and production goals to control things like raw materials and supplies. And so it did clash with the military, but we still had contracts coming in, you know, for companies. And then finally, Roosevelt established the Office of War Mobilization, or OWM, to settle any arguments. Next is creating an army. And so even before France surrendered to Germany, most Americans in Congress opposed a peacetime draft. After the surrender, so that is France to Germany, it's before Pearl Harbor, Congress passed the Selective Service and Training Act by a wide margin. You guys should note that it's the first peacetime draft in American history. And so here are some great pictures of the training. "You're in the Army now" is the slogan. And you guys should know, if you don't already, that GI comes from government issue, which was the label on their clothing. And so American soldiers became called GIs. And there they are, getting in shape. I have pictured here some African American soldiers that were captured, but this is a pretty rare photo. So they served in a segregated army. And you guys should know that they had separate barracks, latrines, which were the bathrooms, and mess halls, which is where they dined. They trained separately, and they were put in all black units led by white officers. The military wanted to keep them away from combat, so they were assigned to construction details. I have two quotes to show the issue here: Jim Crow versus the WWII campaign. And so the quote on the left is, says, "The Army Jim Crows us. Lynchings continue. We are disenfranchised and spat upon. What more could Hitler do to us than that?" So this quote there on the left supports, you know, African Americans against the war, for they were not getting treated equally at home. And so the quote on the right comes from somebody in support of the WWII campaign. So this quote, and then I'll explain what WWII means, is that one African American said, you know, "We know that whatever mad logic of Hitler's new order, there is no hope for us under it. The ethnic theories of the master race admit to no chance of freedom. You know, that this war is going to be for freedom, and so I believe, you know, in America. I believe in what America is standing up for." And so what does WWII stand for? It's for both victory at home and victory over Hitler's racism. And so by the 1940s, many African American leaders, you know, urged their people to support the war. They did it in the newspapers, and they were really trying to achieve the WWII campaign by supporting the draft, by signing up for service. And you know, here is a great example of the WWII, the Tuskegee Airmen. So these are just volunteers, and they fought bravely in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. So again, no WWII, you know, victory at home and over Hitler's racism abroad. And let's go on to life on the home front. So our previous unit was on the Great Depression. So you guys should know that World War II finally ended the Great Depression. I have here pictured on the right people working. It created 19 million new jobs. So it almost doubled the average family's income. And what's another key aspect is that the working class, you know, once ostracized and struggling, now became an integral part of society again. Another part of this change is women. You know, during the Great Depression, the view was that women should not take jobs away from men trying to provide for their families. But there was now a wartime labor shortage, and it forced factories to recruit married women, shown with propaganda on the right. A little bit got cut off. It says soldiers without guns, and there are the housewives. And so the government hired close to 4 million women. It was mostly office work, like secretarial, but it was really Rosie the Riveter that really captured America's imagination, and it won their hearts. And so 2.5 million women actually did work in shipyards and aircraft factories. So I have this one photo here, and then the famous one is pictured here. So Rosie the Riveter was a character from a popular song at the time, and the lyrics were about a girl that worked in a factory while her boyfriend served in the Marines. And so overall, by the end of World War II, this transformed society's perspective of middle-class women, and also changed middle-class women's attitudes about themselves. More battles at home would be with African Americans and their union led by A. Philip Randolph. So guys, the union is the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. There's some of them pictured there on the left, and there's their propaganda in the middle to show that they are being patriotic. And I gave you a great picture of their leader, very proud. What he did is he threatened a march on Washington because he wanted integration into the military jobs. And so FDR responded. Really, since the Reconstruction, there had not been any civil rights legislation. And so here is Executive Order 8892, which officially ended discrimination at the federal level for military jobs. So one success of civil rights done here. Another success for minorities demanding work for World War II was the Bracero program. Bracero is worker in Spanish. And so in 1942, the federal government arranged for Mexican farm workers, pictured up there on the right, to help with harvesting, you know, fruits and vegetables, you know, for the war effort. And this was all done in the Southwest, shown there, the labor camps, kind of harsh conditions there on the bottom. But this did continue until 1964. So kind of another way to bring more people into the workforce because of the war. With everybody working now, there is this new problem of where to put everyone. And so even if there's not housing, the first solution is what's called hotbeds. And you can see there that it was pretty cheap, 25 cents a night, and you could have 8 hours to a bed. Another was federal housing, which we talked a little bit during the Great Depression unit. And these were, you know, fabricated pretty cheaply, but this was a solution for many people. And I think it was, 2 million people lived in government-built housing just during the war. And so though A. Philip Randolph and the Bracero program had some success, there still is racism and violence. And so, you know, some of the cities are crowded, and there is often suspicion and still intolerance that can lead to violence. And so the worst violence was in Detroit. I have the riot there pictured on the left. It actually started off with teenage girls, African American and whites, and then it just kind of slowly triggered other riots until a full-scale, just mob scene happened, and 25 African Americans and 9 whites were killed. So people still were committed to the WWII campaign after this setback, you know, to fight for victory at home and abroad. And then there, pictured on the right, is what happened with Latinos in our country. And so if you see what they're wearing up there, pictured in jail, are these zoot suits. And so they were baggy and pleated pants, and so they usually wore their hair long. Sometimes it was called a ducktail, and the zoot suit angered, especially soldiers, you know, who were in their uniforms, and they saw the zoot suit as unpatriotic. So you can see our sailors there with clubs, and so there was violence towards the Mexican Americans dressed above in their zoot suits. Alright everybody, I'm almost out of time. So the last slide is daily life in wartime. And so Americans had to contribute. They had to do blackouts, right, to hide from the submarines. They had to ration, pictured there with their coupons. They had to grow their own food, so they were seen as patriotic in their victory gardens. And paying for the war, similarly guys, was war bonds. And so that was one way our country could afford World War II. I'm coming out of the bunker. This is Tev, signing off.